What's up, guys? Welcome back. Hope you're doing well. Today I've got an awesome Reddit update story for you. Make sure to subscribe if you're new. TIFU by accidentally casting my screen to the boardroom during a company-wide Zoom presentation. The cursor blinked 3 times before I clicked it. 3 harmless, innocent blinks, red, green, red. That was the last moment my life belonged to me. I was already sweating through my business casual button-down, the one I'd bought specifically for this presentation because my manager, Deborah, had emailed the entire department last Tuesday with the subject line, Professionalism Matters. A gentle reminder about our upcoming Q3 review. I'd spent 45 minutes that morning trying to decide between the navy blue that made me look like a competent adult and the slightly darker navy blue that made me look like a competent adult who maybe, possibly, had his life together. I went with the darker one. I even ironed it, which should tell you how nervous I was because I don't iron. I have a theory that wrinkles add character, but Deborah's email had included a photo attachment of a stock image businessman pointing at a chart with the caption, "Dress for the job you want." And I wanted, desperately, pathetically, to keep my job. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 34 years old. I work in marketing analytics for a company called Synergy Peak Solutions, which sounds like a pharmaceutical brand for erectile dysfunction, but is actually a beat-woe billion SaaS platform that helps other companies optimize their cross-functional team alignment workflows. I don't know what that means either. I've worked there for 6 years, and if you ask me to explain our core product in 1 sentence, I would need at least 3 sentences, 2 hand gestures, and a whiteboard. What I do know is that I crunch numbers, I make PowerPoints that make the numbers look optimistic, and I have a small, windowless office on the 4th floor that smells like the previous occupant's protein shakes. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. It was the big one, the quarterly review where our CEO, Richard Vance, would unveil the new strategic direction while the entire company, all 412 employees, watched from their various screens scattered across 3 time zones. Richard didn't just give presentations, he performed them. He had a headset microphone. He paced. He once made a joke about low-hanging fruit that got a genuine laugh, and I think about that moment at least twice a week, wondering what it must feel like to be that naturally charismatic. I wasn't presenting. Thank God I wasn't presenting. That honor belonged to Deborah, our VP of Marketing, and Richard himself. My role was humbler. I had prepared the data deck. 12 slides of carefully curated analytics showing our Q3 performance, our customer acquisition costs, our lifetime value projections, and a particularly optimistic forecast for Q4 that I'd massaged until it practically purred. Deborah had reviewed it 3 times, sending back corrections like, "Can we make the green more vibrant? Green means money, Marcus, and the y-axis on slide 7 feels aggressive. Can we soften it?" I'd softened the y-axis. I'd made the green more vibrant. I was ready. At 1:45 p.m., I was in Conference Room B, the small boardroom that seated 12 people around a mahogany table that had probably cost more than my car. The walls were glass, frosted glass, thank God, not clear, and the room had that particular corporate smell of recycled air, lemon disinfectant, and the faint ghost of someone's egg salad lunch from 3 days ago. My laptop was plugged into the room's AV system. The large flat screen mounted on the wall showed the familiar Zoom waiting room, that gentle blue gradient that has become the modern equivalent of a stage curtain. Deborah swept in at 1:52, carrying her tablet and a venti iced coffee that I knew from experience contained 3 shots of espresso and enough caramel syrup to induce diabetes in a small village. She was wearing her power suit, charcoal gray, tailored within an inch of its life, and her hair was pulled back so tightly it gave her face a permanent expression of mild surprise. "Marcus," she said, not quite looking at me. "Is the deck loaded?" "Yes, Deborah, slides are ready. I'm just waiting for Richard's admin to grant me co-host privileges so I can share screen when you give me the cue." "Good, good." She took a long sip of her coffee. "Remember, you're not speaking unless I specifically ask you to expand on a data point. You're the invisible hand behind the numbers, the wizard behind the curtain. If the presentation is a symphony, you're the sheet music." "I'm the sheet music," I repeated, because Deborah liked her metaphors acknowledged. "Exactly, silent, essential, unseen." She settled into the chair at the head of the table, the one that faced the screen directly. I sat 3 seats down, my laptop open, the Zoom interface glowing. The waiting room was starting to populate. I could see names appearing in the participant panel, familiar names, names I'd seen in email chains and Slack channels but rarely put faces to. Sarah from HR in Denver. Jake from sales in Austin. Priya from engineering in our main office, probably watching from her desk 2 floors down because she didn't do meetings in person since the pandemic. At 1:58, Richard Vance entered. He didn't sweep in like Deborah, he arrived. He filled the doorway, smiled at everyone and no one, and moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never once in his life worried about an overdraft fee. He was wearing a navy suit darker than mine, of course, and a tie that probably had its own LinkedIn profile. "Marcus, Deborah," he clapped his hands together. "Ready to blow some minds?" "Absolutely, Richard," Deborah said, standing up slightly in her chair, which was her version of a bow. I just nodded and gave a thumbs up, immediately regretting the thumbs up because Richard was a handshake man, or eye contact man, a man who probably thought thumbs up was something his teenage niece did on Instagram. Richard sat in the chair next to Deborah, pulled out his phone, and began scrolling while his admin, a perpetually harried woman named Linda who I don't think had slept since 2019, scurried in to adjust his microphone headset. At 2 p.m. exactly, Linda clicked a button and the Zoom meeting went live. "Good afternoon, Synergy Peak," Richard's voice boomed through the room's speakers, rich and warm and unfairly charismatic. "Welcome to our Q3 All Hands. Whether you're joining us from Denver, Austin, or right here in our headquarters, know that you're part of something special. Before we dive into the numbers, and trust me, the numbers are exciting, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible work this team has put in over the last quarter." I tuned out slightly. I'd heard Richard's opening at the last 3 all-hands meetings. He always started with gratitude, pivoted to a sports metaphor. Last quarter it was, "We're not just playing the game, we're changing the rules," and then handed off to whoever was presenting the hard data. My job was to wait for Deborah's nod, then share my screen and click through the slides while she narrated. I pulled up my email while Richard talked. Habit. I had 47 unread messages, which was actually low for a Monday. Most were Slack notifications that had forwarded themselves to my inbox because I hadn't checked Slack in the last 20 minutes. One was from my mother with the subject FWD, FWD, FWD. "This will warm your heart." One was from Amazon telling me my package had shipped, the package being a new shower curtain because my current one was developing what I can only describe as a personality and not a good one. I glanced up. Richard was still talking, now using his hands to describe what I assumed was a paradigm shift. Deborah was nodding along, her eyes fixed on Richard with the intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse. I had time. I clicked over to my personal email. Another habit, a bad one, the kind of habit you develop when you spend 6 years in jobs where no one really watches what you're doing as long as the spreadsheets arrive on time. My personal Gmail loaded, 3 new emails. One was a newsletter from a cooking blog I'd subscribed to 3 years ago and never unsubscribed from. One was a credit card statement. And one was from a name that made my stomach do a small, complicated flip. The name was Elena Voss. Elena and I had dated for 2 years. We'd broken up 8 months ago. It had been not clean. Not the kind of breakup where you mutually decide to be friends and then actually follow through. More the kind where one person, me, thought things were fine until the other person, Elena, sat me down on a Tuesday night and explained that she felt like she was drowning in my inertia. Her words. I'd written them down later in a notes app I now avoided opening because they had the terrible ring of truth. The email subject line was simple: "Hey, just hey," 2 letters and a punctuation mark that contained multitudes. I shouldn't have clicked it, I know that now. I knew it then in the part of my brain that still functioned like a responsible adult. But the other part of my brain, the part that had spent 8 months reconstructing every conversation, every argument, every moment where I might have noticed the drowning and thrown a rope, that part was already clicking. The email loaded. "Hey Marcus, I know this is out of the blue. I've been thinking about you, a lot actually. I know things ended badly and that was mostly my fault. I was going through some stuff and I took it out on you, and inertia was a cruel word to use. You weren't inert, you were stable. You were kind. You were the kind of person who remembers to buy the good orange juice, and I didn't appreciate that until I was buying my own orange juice and kept getting the kind with pulp. I don't know what I'm asking exactly, maybe just, are you okay? Am I too late to ask that? Elena." I read it 3 times. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest, a rhythm that felt less like a heartbeat and more like a Morse code message I couldn't translate. The good orange juice. She'd always complained that I bought the expensive kind, the fresh squeezed stuff that came in the glass bottle. She'd said it was a waste of money when the carton stuff tasted the same. And now she was using it as a metaphor for my supposed virtues. I became aware that Richard had stopped talking. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. "And now I'd like to turn it over to Deborah, our VP of Marketing, to walk us through the Q3 numbers," Richard was saying. Deborah stood up, smoothing her jacket. "Thank you, Richard." As Richard said, the numbers tell a story, and it's a story of growth, of resilience, and of strategic pivoting. To help me tell that story, I have Marcus Chen, our senior marketing analyst, who has prepared a comprehensive data deck. "Marcus," she turned to me, her eyebrows raised in that specific way that meant, "Share your screen now, idiot." I panicked, not because of the presentation, because of Elena. Because her email was open on my screen, taking up the entire display, her name and her words and my pathetic, staring face reflected in the laptop's dark bezel. I had maybe 2 seconds before Deborah's eyebrow raise turned into something worse. My hand moved before my brain did. I found the Zoom share screen button by muscle memory. I'd done this 100 times in smaller meetings. Click. A dialog box appeared showing my available screens and application windows. I needed to share the PowerPoint, which was minimized somewhere. But in my panic, I wasn't looking at the dialog box carefully. I was looking at Deborah, whose eyebrows were now fully elevated. I was aware of Richard turning to look at me with mild curiosity. I was aware of the 47 people in the Zoom waiting to see our Q3 numbers. I clicked the first option that looked like a presentation window. The boardroom screen flickered. And then, in high definition, displayed for the entire company to see, was my personal Gmail inbox, specifically, Alina's email. "Hey Marcus, I know this is out of the blue, I've been thinking about you, a lot actually." The silence that followed was not a normal silence. It was a silence with texture, with weight, with a specific gravity that seemed to bend the light in the room. I heard Deborah make a sound that was not quite a word, more like the noise a tea kettle makes right before it boils. Richard's headset microphone picked up his breathing, which had become very slow and very deliberate. I looked at the boardroom screen, then I looked at my laptop screen, then I looked at Deborah, whose face had gone the color of old chalk. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what am I looking at?" My mouse hand was frozen. I couldn't move it. It was as if the cursor had become an extension of my panic, stuck in the center of Alina's email like it was highlighting her words for emphasis. "That's," I started. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "That's not the presentation." "No," Richard said, and his voice had lost all its boom, all its warmth. It was flat, clinical. "It appears to be your personal email, which is now being broadcast to the entire company." I looked at the Zoom participant panel. The number had jumped from 47 to 63. People were still joining, and every single one of them was seeing Alina's email. I could see the chat sidebar erupting, messages scrolling too fast to read, little bubbles of digital horror piling up like a car crash in slow motion. I finally moved my mouse. I clicked the stop share button with the desperation of a man slapping a fire alarm. The boardroom screen went back to the familiar Zoom blue, but the damage was done. The silence remained, now filled with the terrible knowledge of what everyone had just witnessed. Deborah sat down very slowly. She didn't look at me. She looked at Richard, who was rubbing his temples with his thumb and middle finger. "Marcus," Richard said, "perhaps you should step out." My voice was a rasp. "I can explain, it was an accident, I was just out," Deborah said, not looking at me. Now I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who had never learned to walk properly. I closed my laptop with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I walked to the door. I could feel every eye in the room on me, Richard's, Deborah's, Linda's, who was looking at me with an expression that might have been pity or might have been disgust. I couldn't tell. I made it to the hallway before I realized I was still holding my breath. The fourth-floor hallway of Synergy Peak Solutions is long and beige and smells like the carpet is made of recycled optimism. I stood there for a moment, my back against the wall, my laptop clutched to my chest like a shield. Through the frosted glass of Conference Room B, I could see the blurred shapes of movement. The meeting was continuing. Deborah had apparently decided to soldier on without the data deck, because I could hear Richard's voice again, though it lacked its usual performative energy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with a hand that was still shaking. 3 Slack notifications, all from the general company channel. The first was from Jake in sales, "Dude." The second was from Priya in engineering, "Marcus, what?" The third was from someone I didn't recognize, a username that was just a string of numbers. "This is the best all hands ever." I put my phone back in my pocket. I couldn't look at it. I couldn't look at anything. I stared at the beige wall opposite me and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The door to Conference Room B opened. I straightened up, expecting Deborah, expecting security, expecting someone to hand me a box for my desk belongings. But it was Linda, Richard's admin. She stepped out and closed the door softly behind her. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was surprisingly gentle. "Richard wants you to go home for the day. He says we'll discuss this tomorrow." "Am I fired?" The question came out before I could stop it, naked and desperate. Linda's expression didn't change. "He didn't say that. He said go home, get some rest, we'll discuss tomorrow." She reached out and patted my arm, an awkward bird-like gesture that suggested she didn't have much practice with comfort. Then she went back into the conference room, leaving me alone in the hallway with my laptop and my shame. I didn't go home, not immediately. I walked to the stairwell. The elevators felt too exposed, too likely to trap me with someone from the meeting, and climbed down to the second floor where the marketing department lived. My office was at the end of a row of identical doors, a space barely large enough for a desk, a chair, and the lingering smell of someone else's fitness journey. I sat down. I opened my laptop. The screen woke to Alina's email still open, her words still glowing, now seeming less like a message and more like evidence. Evidence of my incompetence, my distraction, my fundamental unfitness for professional existence. I closed the email. I closed Gmail. I opened the PowerPoint deck, the real one, the one with the vibrant green and the softened y-axis. It sat there, 12 slides of meaningless optimism, and I felt something crack inside me. Not a dramatic break, not a shattering, more like a stress fracture, the kind of damage that accumulates slowly until one day you step wrong and realize the bone was never as strong as you thought. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. It buzzed a second time, a third. The Slack notifications were probably multiplying like bacteria in a petri dish. I could imagine the channels, the general channel, the random channel, the private channels I wasn't invited to, where people were screenshotting Alina's email and dissecting my personal life with the forensic enthusiasm of internet detectives. I picked up my phone, not to check Slack, to call someone. My mother answered on the third ring. "Marcus, honey, is everything okay? You're usually in meetings on Monday afternoons." Mom, I said, and my voice broke on the single syllable, embarrassing and raw. Marcus, what's wrong? Are you hurt? No, I'm not hurt, I stopped. How did I explain this? How did I tell my mother, who still sent me newspaper clippings about millennials in the workplace with handwritten notes saying this reminded me of you, that I had just accidentally broadcast my ex-girlfriend's emotional email to 400 coworkers? I had a bad day at work, I said finally. A really bad day. There was a pause. I could hear her kitchen clock ticking in the background, the one shaped like a cat with a moving tail that she'd had since I was a child. Do you want to come over for dinner? She asked. I'm making lasagna, the good kind, with the real cheese, not the low-fat kind your father likes. I almost laughed, almost. I can't, Mom, I need to. I need to figure some things out, but thank you. Marcus, she said, and her voice had that particular maternal weight, the one that made me feel simultaneously 8 years old and deeply loved. Whatever happened, it's not the end of the world. I promise. Remember when you were 9 and you threw up on the principal during the holiday concert? You thought you'd never live it down, and you didn't for a while. But eventually, people forgot. Or they remembered, but it didn't matter anymore. Thanks, Mom. Come for dinner Wednesday, even if you don't want to talk, even if you just want to sit and eat lasagna and pretend you're not listening to your father complain about the neighbors. Okay. Wednesday, I hung up. I sat in my office chair and swiveled to face the wall. There was a poster there, one that had come with the office, showing a mountain peak at sunrise with the word perseverance in bold white letters. I'd never taken it down because taking it down felt like admitting defeat. Now I stared at it and wondered if perseverance was just another word for refusing to acknowledge when you've lost. At 4:30 p.m., I finally left the office. I took the stairs again, exited through the parking garage to avoid the lobby, and walked to my car, a 2014 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. The late afternoon sun was doing that golden thing it does in late October, making everything look more beautiful than it deserved to be. The office park where Synergy Peak lived was surrounded by trees that were just starting to turn, patches of red and orange against the persistent green. I drove home without turning on the radio. I couldn't bear music, couldn't bear voices, couldn't bear the illusion that the world was continuing normally when my own had developed a hairline fracture. My apartment was a 20-minute drive from the office, a one-bedroom in a complex that advertised itself as luxury living, but was really just regular living with slightly nicer countertops. I parked. I climbed the stairs to the second floor. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and stood in my living room for a long moment, looking at my life. The couch was from IKEA blue with a throw blanket draped over one arm that Alina had bought. The coffee table was covered in the detritus of a single person's life, a half-empty coffee mug, a stack of unread New Yorkers, a remote control, a phone charger. The kitchen was visible from the living room, and I could see the good orange juice sitting in the refrigerator, the glass bottle catching the light from the window. I walked to the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator. I took out the orange juice. I poured a glass and drank it standing at the counter, looking at the wall where Alina and I had once hung a painting we'd bought at a street fair, a watercolor of a city that didn't exist, all purple rooftops and impossible bridges. I'd taken it down 3 months after she left because looking at it made my chest hurt. Now the wall was bare except for a faint rectangle where the paint was slightly less faded. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, I picked it up and looked. 17 Slack notifications, 4 text messages, 2 missed calls. The texts were from my friend Dave, who worked in it at a different company across town. Dave, 3:47 p.m. Dude, are you okay? Sarah from HR just texted my girlfriend who knows someone at your company and apparently something wild happened at your all hands. Dave, 3:52 p.m. Marcus, Dave, 4:15 p.m. Okay, I'm seeing screenshots. Holy shit, call me. I put the phone face down on the counter. I couldn't deal with Dave right now. I couldn't deal with anyone. I finished my orange juice, put the glass in the sink, and walked to my bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled from my restless sleep the night before. I lay down on top of the covers, still in my dark navy button-down, still in my khakis, still wearing my socks. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the panic to come. But panic didn't come. Instead, something worse arrived, clarity. I thought about my job, 6 years at Synergy Peak. 6 years of making the green more vibrant, of softening y-axes, of being the invisible hand behind the numbers. 6 years of Deborah's mixed metaphors and Richard's performative gratitude. 6 years of perseverance, posters, and recycled air and the smell of someone else's protein shakes. I thought about Alina, the real Alina, not the Alina of her email. The Alina who had grown tired of my stability, my kindness, my good orange juice. The Alina who had tried for 2 years to get me to want something, anything, with the kind of urgency that she wanted things. The Alina who had left not because she didn't love me, but because she couldn't bear to watch me slowly settle into a life I didn't seem to care about shaping. And I thought about the email. I've been thinking about you. A lot, actually. 8 months of silence and now this. Was it coincidence that it arrived on the day of the all-hands? Had she known? No, that was paranoid. Alina didn't know about my job, not really. She'd never paid attention to my quarterly review schedule. She'd probably sent it on a Monday afternoon because she'd spent the weekend lonely and nostalgic. the way people do when the weather turns and the light gets golden and everything feels like a memory. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up without thinking. It was an email notification from Alina. My heart did that complicated rhythm again. I opened it. Marcus, I don't know if you'll respond to my first email. I understand if you don't, but I need you to know I didn't mean to make things harder for you. I just couldn't stop thinking about what I said about inertia. It wasn't fair. You were never inert. You were just waiting. Waiting for something to push you, and I think maybe I was supposed to be that push, but I pushed in the wrong direction. I pushed you away instead of pushing you forward. If you want to talk, I'm here. If you don't, I understand. Either way, I needed to say that I'm sorry, truly sorry. Alina, I read it twice. Then I set my phone on the nightstand and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come, but something like peace did, a quiet, hollow feeling that wasn't happiness but was at least a cessation of the spinning. I lay there for an hour, maybe two, watching the light in the room fade from gold to gray to blue. When I finally sat up, it was past 7 o'clock. My apartment was dark except for the glow of the streetlight outside my window. I changed out of my work clothes. I put on sweatpants and a t-shirt that had a hole in the shoulder. I ordered Thai food from the place on the corner because it was the only thing I could think of that didn't require decisions. While I waited for the delivery, I sat on my couch and finally opened Slack. 412 notifications. I felt my stomach lurch. I didn't read them all. I couldn't. I scrolled through the general channel, watching the train wreck in digital slow motion. The screenshots had indeed been shared. Someone had captured Alina's email in high resolution, and it was being passed around with the kind of gleeful horror that only a corporate environment can produce. The comments ranged from sympathetic, "OMG poor Marcus," to analytical, "This is why you use separate browsers for work and personal," to genuinely cruel, "Dude can't even keep his ex-girlfriend in check, how does he keep his job?" I closed Slack. I deleted the app from my phone. It felt like cutting off a limb to stop an infection, but it was the only thing I could do. The Thai food arrived. I ate it without tasting it, sitting on my couch watching a nature documentary about deep-sea creatures that I'd already seen twice. The anglerfish appeared, its bioluminescent lure dangling in the eternal dark, and I thought about how some things attract prey simply by glowing in places where nothing else glows. My laptop screen had been like that, a single bright point in the corporate darkness, drawing every eye without meaning to. At 9:30 p.m. my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. But the number was unfamiliar, and some part of me, the part that still believed in consequences, in facing things, made me pick up. Marcus, it was Deborah. Her voice was strange, not the tight, controlled tone of the boardroom, but something looser. Tired maybe, or drunk. "Deborah, hi, don't hi me." But she didn't sound angry, she sounded something else. Resigned. "I just got off a 2-hour call with Richard and legal. Do you know what it's like to spend 2 hours discussing your employee's personal email with the legal team?" "I'm sorry, Deborah, I really am. It was a mistake. I was distracted and I clicked the wrong window and—" "I know," she sighed, a long, ragged sound. "I know it was a mistake. Richard knows it was a mistake. Legal knows it was a mistake. But Marcus, do you understand what this looks like? We had investors on that call, potential clients. We had the Denver office watching and the Austin office, and half of those people have never met you, and now their only impression of Marcus Chen is that he's the guy who got an email from his ex-girlfriend during the quarterly review." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "Richard wants to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m., his office, not mine, his." She paused. "I'm supposed to tell you that this is a discussion about your future with the company. I'm supposed to be professional about it. But Marcus, I've known you for 6 years. You're good at your job, you're reliable, you're the sheet music, remember? And I hate that I'm going to lose you because of one stupid click." "Are you saying I'm fired?" My voice was barely audible. "I'm saying Richard wants to see you at 9 a.m. I'm saying you should probably update your resume tonight. And I'm saying—" She stopped. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her in her own apartment, probably still in her power suit, probably staring at a wall much like mine. "I'm saying I'm sorry, this shouldn't be the end, but it probably is." She hung up. I sat in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence that followed the click. I didn't update my resume, I didn't pack a box. I sat on my couch and watched the anglerfish documentary until it looped back to the beginning, and then I watched it again, because the deep sea made sense to me in a way that the surface world no longer did. Down there in the crushing dark, there were no quarterly reviews. There were no ex-girlfriends sending emails. There were only creatures surviving by whatever means they had, glowing softly, waiting for something to change. At midnight, I finally went to bed. I didn't set an alarm. I lay in the dark and listened to the city outside my window, the occasional car, the distant siren, the hum of a world that had not stopped turning simply because my life had developed a crack. I woke up at 6 a.m. without the alarm, my body too wired to sleep anymore. I showered. I put on my other navy shirt, the slightly lighter one, the one that didn't feel like it belonged to yesterday's disaster. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote an email, not to Alina, not yet, I wasn't ready for that. I wrote to Richard, and to Deborah, and to the entire company. Subject: an apology and an explanation. Yesterday, during our Q3 all-hands meeting, I made an unforgivable error. I allowed my personal life to intrude upon a professional space, and in doing so, I disrupted a presentation that many of you worked hard to prepare. I am deeply sorry for that disruption. I want to be clear, this was not a prank, not a hack, not anything other than human error. I was distracted. I clicked the wrong button. And in a single moment, I transformed a professional meeting into a spectacle. Some of you have reached out with sympathy, some with criticism, some with screenshots that will probably follow me to my grave. I understand all of it. I would probably do the same if our positions were reversed. I don't know what happens next. I have a meeting with Richard this morning that will probably determine my future with Synergy Peak. But regardless of that outcome, I wanted you all to know that I am sorry. And I wanted to remind you, because I need the reminder myself, that behind every screen, behind every Zoom window, behind every job title and quarterly metric, there is a person. A person who buys the wrong orange juice sometimes. A person who gets emails they don't know how to answer. A person who is trying, however imperfectly, to keep their life together. Be kind to each other. Be kind to yourselves. Marcus Chen, I read it 3 times, then I sent it. I arrived at the office at 8:45 a.m. The parking garage was nearly empty, early for most of the company, but Richard was always in by 7:30. I took the elevator this time. I couldn't bear the stairs, the slow climb, the extra time to think. The 4th floor was quiet. The marketing department was still mostly empty. I walked past my office without looking in and continued down the hall to Richard's corner suite. His door was open. He was inside, sitting at his desk, reading something on his monitor. He looked up when I knocked. Marcus, he didn't smile, he didn't frown. His face was perfectly neutral, the expression of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting to deliver it. Come in, close the door. I did. The office smelled of leather and coffee. Richard's degrees hung on the wall behind him, MBA from Wharton, undergraduate from somewhere prestigious I couldn't remember. A photo of him shaking hands with a senator. A photo of him on a sailboat grinning into the sun. Sit, he said. I sat in the chair across from his desk. It was lower than his chair, designed to make visitors feel small. It worked. I got your email, Richard said. The one you sent to the whole company. Deborah forwarded it to me at 6:30 this morning. She called me at 6:35, which is earlier than I prefer to think about work, to tell me that she thought it was brave. Brave was not a word Richard valued. I could tell by the way he said it, like it was a flavor he didn't enjoy. I wasn't trying to be brave, I said. I just wanted to explain, apologize. And you did, very eloquently, I might add. Behind every screen there is a person. Very touching. He leaned back in his chair. Do you know how many responses that email got, Marcus? I shook my head. 147 as of 8 a.m. People replying all, of course, because no one knows how to use email properly, most of them supportive. We stand with Marcus. Everyone makes mistakes. This is why we need better work-life boundaries. It's become something of a movement, your little apology. He said movement the way someone might say infestation. Richard, I didn't mean for it to. I know you didn't mean for it to happen. That's the problem, Marcus. You never mean for things to happen. You're passive, you're reactive. He waved his hand, searching for the word. Inert, yes, inert. You wait for things to happen to you and then you respond. You don't drive. You don't lead, you just exist, and yesterday your existence became a liability. The word hit me like a physical blow. Inert, the same word Alina had used. The word she'd apologized for using, the word that had apparently followed me into my professional life without me knowing it. Your work is fine, Richard continued. Your numbers are good, your decks are adequate. But Synergy Peak is entering a new phase, Marcus. We're pivoting to aggressive growth. We're acquiring. We're expanding. We need people who make things happen, not people who wait for things to happen to them. Do you understand? I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take a leave of absence. 2 weeks paid, call it a mental health break because God knows we all need one these days. During that time, you're going to think about whether you want to be the kind of person who accidentally shares his ex-girlfriend's email with 400 people, or whether you want to be something more. When you come back, we'll have another conversation. Maybe there's a place for you here, maybe there isn't, but I want you to really think about it, Marcus, not just about keeping your job. About what kind of professional you want to be. He stood up. The meeting was over. That's it, I asked, standing slowly. I'm not fired. Not today, but Marcus. He looked at me and for a moment his performative charisma dropped away and I saw something tired and real underneath. You need to decide if you want to be here, because if you do, you need to stop being invisible. The sheet music doesn't get a standing ovation. The conductor does. I left his office. I walked back down the hall. I passed Deborah's office. Her door was closed, but I could see her silhouette through the frosted glass bent over her desk. I didn't knock. I went to my own office, the small windowless room with the Perseverance poster, and I sat down. 2 weeks paid leave. It felt less like a gift and more like a test. A test I wasn't sure I knew how to pass. I opened my laptop. The screen woke to my desktop, a generic landscape photo that had come pre-installed. I stared at it for a long moment, then I opened my email. Alina's 2 emails were still there. Unanswered, I clicked reply. Alina, you're not too late to ask if I'm okay. I'm not okay. But I'm not okay in ways that have nothing to do with you and everything to do with me. I got your email at the worst possible moment, and in a way that I'm not ready to explain over text. It changed my life. Not because of what you said, but because of what it made me see about myself. I don't know if I want to talk, I don't know if I'm ready, but I wanted you to know that I got your message, and I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to push me. I'm sorry I was waiting for something to happen instead of making something happen. I need some time, but maybe we can talk, eventually. Marcus, I sent it before I could change my mind. Then I closed my laptop, stood up and looked around my office. The Perseverance poster, the stack of unread reports, the coffee mug with the company logo. 6 years of my life reduced to a small room and a windowless wall. I took the poster down. I folded it in half, then in half again, and put it in the trash can. It didn't make the room look better, but it made it look more honest. I left the office at 9:45 a.m. The building was filling up now, people arriving with their coffee and their morning conversations, their plans and their deadlines. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I was the invisible hand after all, the sheet music. I walked out through the lobby, past the receptionist who was on the phone and didn't look up, past the wall of company values, innovation, integrity, impact, and out into the October morning. The sky was overcast, the golden light of yesterday replaced by a flat gray that felt more appropriate. I stood in the parking lot and tried to remember the last time I'd had 2 weeks with nowhere to be, nothing to do, no Deborah waiting for a deck, no Richard waiting for a presentation. I couldn't remember, maybe college, maybe never. I got in my car, I didn't drive home. I drove to the grocery store, the fancy one, the organic one that Alina had always preferred and I'd always complained was too expensive. I walked the aisles slowly without a list, without a plan. I bought the good orange juice. I bought fresh pasta. I bought a bottle of wine that cost more than my usual $6 selection. I bought things I didn't need simply because I wanted them, because the act of choosing felt like a small revolution. At the checkout, the cashier, a young woman with blue hair and a name tag that said Jasmine, smiled at me. "Big plans tonight?" "I don't know," I said, and realized it was the first honest answer I'd given in years. "I really don't know," she laughed, a bright, uncomplicated sound. "That's the best kind of night, possibility." I drove home. I put away the groceries. I poured a glass of the expensive wine, which tasted basically the same as the cheap wine, and I sat on my couch in the middle of a Tuesday morning with no meetings, no deadlines, no screens to share. My phone buzzed, an email notification. It was from Alina. "Marcus, take all the time you need, I'll be here, and for what it's worth, I never thought you were inert. I thought you were waiting for the right moment. Maybe this is it." Alina, I set the phone down. I looked at my apartment, the IKEA couch, the bare wall, the coffee table with its clutter. I looked at my life, the small, accumulated choices that had led me here to this moment, to this unexpected pause. And for the first time in 6 years, maybe longer, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was floating, not moving forward, not moving back, just existing in the space between one thing and the next, waiting to see what I would become when I finally started to swim. The wine was warm on my tongue, the apartment was quiet. Outside, the gray sky pressed against the windows, but inside there was light. Not much, just enough to see by, just enough to begin. I didn't leave the apartment for 3 days, not because I was hiding, though maybe I was a little. More because I couldn't remember what people did when they had nowhere to be. The first day, I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, my body still tuned to the rhythm of alarm clocks and commute anxiety. I lay in bed until 7:30, waiting for the panic to set in, for the voice in my head that sounds suspiciously like Deborah to start listing all the productive things I should be doing. But the voice was quiet. Or maybe I was too tired to hear it. I made coffee. I sat on the couch. I watched the sky change from gray to lighter gray to something that might have been blue if you were feeling generous. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't check Slack. I couldn't. I deleted the app, and the thought of reinstalling it made my hands sweat. I didn't check my work email. I let my phone die on the coffee table, a small black rectangle slowly becoming a paperweight. On the second day, I took a shower that lasted 45 minutes. I stood under the hot water until it ran cold, until my skin was pink and tender and felt like it belonged to me again. I scrubbed the office off my body, the recycled air, the stress sweat, the phantom smell of Deborah's caramel espresso. I washed my hair twice. I used the expensive body wash that Alina had left in my shower 6 months ago, the one that smelled like eucalyptus and something else, something that made me think of her standing in this same spot, her hair dark with water, her shoulders narrow and sharp. I cried in the shower, not dramatically, not the kind of crying that makes noise, just tears mixing with the water running down my face, salt and heat and relief. I couldn't have told you what I was crying about specifically. The email maybe, the look on Deborah's face, Richard's word, inert, echoing Alina's. Or maybe I was crying because for the first time in years I had space to cry, space to feel something without scheduling it between meetings. On the third day my phone was still dead. I left it that way. I got dressed, not in business casual, not in sweatpants, but in jeans and a sweater that had holes in the cuffs from years of wear. I put on real shoes, not loafers, but the beaten-up sneakers I used to wear to concerts back when I went to concerts. I walked out of my apartment and into the October afternoon without a destination. The city felt different at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, slower, more honest. I passed a coffee shop filled with people on laptops, their faces lit by screens, and I felt a strange tenderness for them, these afternoon warriors fighting their own invisible battles. I passed a dog park where a golden retriever was chasing a tennis ball with the single-minded devotion of a creature who had never heard of quarterly reviews. I walked for 2 hours, my feet finding a rhythm I hadn't known they remembered. I ended up at a bookstore. Not a Barnes & Noble, not one of those airport bookstores with their tables of business memoirs and thrillers with embossed covers. This was a small shop wedged between a dry cleaner and a closed-down tattoo parlor, its windows crowded with handwritten recommendation cards and stacks of paperbacks that looked like they'd been read at least twice. The sign above the door said "The Last Chapter," which I thought was either terribly optimistic or terribly pessimistic, depending on how you looked at it. The bell above the door jangled when I entered. The smell hit me first, old paper, dust, the particular vanilla scent of aging books. It was glorious, it was overwhelming, it was the opposite of my office. "Can I help you find something?" The voice came from behind a counter piled high with books. A man emerged, 60s maybe, with a white beard that looked like it required its own maintenance schedule and glasses that sat on the very tip of his nose. "I don't know," I said, "I just walked in." He nodded as if this were a perfectly reasonable explanation. "First time? Is it that obvious? You have the look. I just got fired or quit or had some kind of existential crisis and now I'm in a bookstore because that's what people in movies do look." He smiled and it transformed his face from severe to grandfatherly. "Don't worry, we get a lot of those. The books don't judge. The coffee's in the back, help yourself, pay what you want." I wandered the aisles. The store was organized not by genre or alphabet but by what I can only describe as vibe. There was a section called "Books for When You're Sad But Don't Know Why," another called "Books That Will Make You Feel Smarter Than Your Boss." My favorite was "Books You Pretend to Have Read at Parties," which included a copy of Infinite Jest with a coffee stain on the cover that looked suspiciously intentional. I ended up in a corner near the back in a section labeled "Books About People Who Messed Up But Turned Out Okay." It was a small section, 3 shelves, maybe 40 books total. I ran my fingers along the spines. "The Great Gatsby," "A Confederacy of Dunces," "The Remains of the Day," a book I'd never heard of called "The Elegance of the Hedgehog." I pulled out "The Remains of the Day" because I recognized the title from somewhere, maybe a college syllabus I'd never fully engaged with. I sat down in a battered armchair that smelled like pipe tobacco and started reading. I read for 4 hours. I didn't mean to. I meant to read a chapter, maybe 2, then continue my wandering. But the book had me, a butler looking back on his life, his service, his missed opportunities, his quiet, devastating regret. I read about Stephen's driving across England, visiting a woman he might have loved, realizing too late that he had given his best years to an employer who didn't deserve them, to a sense of duty that had become indistinguishable from emptiness. At 6 p.m. my stomach growled. I looked up, disoriented, the bookstore's yellow light replacing the afternoon sun that had been coming through the windows when I sat down. The white-bearded man was locking the front door, flipping the sign to "Closed." "Oh," I said, standing up, the book clutched to my chest like a shield. "I'm sorry, I lost track of time." "Don't be sorry," he said. "That's the best review a book can get. You buying that one?" I looked at the price penciled inside the cover. $8. I had $8. I had more than $8, but somehow the simplicity of the transaction felt important. "Yes," I said. He rang me up in a ledger, actual pen on actual paper, no register in sight. "Stevens," he said, reading the cover. "Good choice, tragic choice, but good. You see yourself in him?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. I think I'm afraid I might." "That's the first step," he said, handing me the book in a paper bag. "Recognizing the tragedy before it becomes your tragedy. Come back when you're done. I'll recommend something with a happier ending." I walked home in the dark, the book heavy in my bag, my legs tired from walking, my mind fuller than it had been in years. I made pasta, the fresh stuff I'd bought, with butter and parmesan and nothing else. I ate it at my kitchen table, not in front of a screen, not while checking email. I read more of Stephen's story. I went to bed at 10 p.m., early for me, and fell asleep before I could start worrying about tomorrow. On the 4th day, I called my mother. "Marcus," she said, her voice bright with surprise. "I didn't expect to hear from you until Wednesday. Is everything okay?" "I'm on leave," I said. 2 weeks. "Paid leave?" The brightness dimmed, replaced by concern. "Did something happen? Did they fire you?" "Not yet. It's complicated. Can I come for dinner tonight instead of Wednesday?" "Of course, your father will be thrilled. He's been complaining that the neighbors trimmed their hedges too short and he needs a fresh audience." I drove to my parents' house in the suburbs, a 40-minute trip that I hadn't made in 3 months. The house was the same as it had been my entire life, a modest split level with a lawn that my father treated like a competitive sport and a front door that needed painting. My mother met me on the porch before I could knock, her face already searching mine for clues. "You're too thin," she said, which was her standard greeting. "Come in, the lasagna's in the oven." "Your father's in his chair." My father was indeed in his chair, a recliner that had molded to his body over 20 years of evening news and Sunday football. He looked up when I entered, his eyes magnified by reading glasses, a newspaper folded in his lap. "Marcus," he said, "your mother says you're on leave." "Yes." "Paid?" "Yes," he nodded, returning to his paper. Good, you work too hard, always have. Even in high school you were up until midnight doing homework that probably didn't matter. Your mother and I used to worry you'd have a heart attack before 30. I didn't work that hard, I said, though I knew he was right. You worked hard at working hard, my mother called from the kitchen. That's different from working hard at living. Dinner was lasagna, the good kind, with real cheese that stretched in long strings when you served it. My father talked about the neighbors' hedges. My mother talked about her book club, which had recently read something very scandalous that she wouldn't name but clearly enjoyed. They didn't ask about work. They didn't ask about Alina, though I knew my mother knew about the breakup. I'd told her in a phone call 8 months ago, a conversation that had lasted 3 minutes and ended with her saying, well, there are other fish in the sea, which I knew was her way of saying she was sorry. After dinner, we sat in the living room. My father dozed in his chair, snoring softly. My mother and I did the dishes together, our old routine, me washing and her drying. Marcus, she said, not looking at me. What really happened? So I told her, all of it. The email, the screen share, the boardroom, the screenshots, Richard's speech about being inert. I told her about Alina's message, about my reply, about the 2 weeks stretching ahead of me like an empty road. I told her about the bookstore, about Stevens the butler, about the man with the white beard who said the books don't judge. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When I finished, she set down the plate she was drying and turned to face me. Do you remember, she said, when you were 12 and you wanted to be a writer? I blinked. No, I don't think I ever wanted to be a writer. You did. You wrote stories in spiral notebooks. Little mysteries, adventures. You showed one to your father and he said, she stopped, her mouth tightening. He said you needed a real job, that writing was a hobby, not a career, and you stopped. You put the notebooks in a box and you never wrote another story. I don't remember that, I said, but even as I said it, something flickered. A memory of lined paper, of a pencil worn down to a nub, of a feeling I'd had once a long time ago, of wanting to make something that wasn't a spreadsheet. You were always good at numbers, my mother continued. So you became good at numbers. You became so good at numbers that you forgot there was anything else. And now you're 34 and your girlfriend left because you were inert, and your boss said the same thing, and you're standing in my kitchen wondering how you got here. I don't know what to do, I said, and my voice cracked, but I didn't care. Mom, I don't know what I want. I don't know if I want to go back. I don't know if I want Alina back. I don't know anything. She reached out and took my hand. Her hands were small, wrinkled, strong from decades of gardening and cooking and holding things together. Then don't know, she said. For 2 weeks, don't know, be uncertain, be lost, read your book about the butler, walk around. Talk to strangers, let yourself not have a plan, Marcus. When was the last time you didn't have a plan? I thought about it. Maybe never. Exactly, so try it, be messy, be wrong. Make mistakes that don't involve screen share buttons. She squeezed my hand. And when the 2 weeks are up, you'll know not everything, but enough. I stayed until 10 p.m., later than I'd intended. My father woke up long enough to shake my hand and tell me to take care of myself, which was his version of I love you. I drove home through the dark suburbs, the streets empty and peaceful, the houses glowing with their own small lives. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't check my phone. I hadn't charged it since Tuesday. It was still dead on the coffee table and I left it that way. I got into bed with Stevens the butler and read until my eyes burned, until the words started to blur, until I fell asleep with the book open on my chest like a shield. On the 5th day, I went back to the bookstore. The white-bearded man, whose name I learned from a handwritten sign behind the counter, was Harold, nodded when I entered as if he'd been expecting me. Finished, Stevens? Not yet. Close? Good, when you're done, I have something for you, something with a happier ending like I promised. I spent the morning in the books about people who messed up but turned out okay section, but I didn't start a new book. I just sat in the armchair and thought. About my father telling me writing wasn't a career. About my mother saying I'd always been good at numbers. About the way I'd built my life like a spreadsheet, cells and formulas and conditional formatting, everything neat and predictable and safe. At noon, Harold brought me a cup of coffee in a mug that said World's Okayest Librarian. He didn't ask what I was thinking about. He just set the coffee down and went back to his counter. I stayed until closing again. I finished the remains of the day sitting in that armchair, the last pages turning in the yellow light, Stephen's final revelation hitting me like a physical blow. That he had wasted his life on dignity and service, that it was too late to change, that all he could do was try to make the remains of his day better than what had come before. I bought the book. Harold wrapped it in brown paper and handed it to me with another one, The Elegance of the Hedgehog, which he'd promised had a happier ending, though he admitted it took some work to get there. You're different, he said as I was leaving. From Tuesday you look less like you're drowning. I'm not sure I'm not drowning, I said. Maybe, but now you're doing it with style, I laughed. It felt strange, like a muscle I'd forgotten I had. On the 6th day, I charged my phone. I didn't want to. I wanted to keep it dead, to stay in the bubble of my leave, protected from the world I'd left behind. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. I plugged it in and waited for it to come back to life, watching the battery icon fill like a glass of water. When it turned on, the notifications exploded. Email after email after email. Slack had sent me a dozen "you have new messages" alerts. My mother had texted twice just checking in. Dave had texted 4 more times. And there was one email from Synergy Peak from Linda, Richard's admin. Marcus, Richard asked me to check in. He wants to know if you're using your time productively. I told him you were probably reflecting, which seemed to satisfy him for now. Also, Deborah asked me to tell you, off the record, that your email to the company has become something of a legend. People are quoting it in meetings. Behind every screen there is a person. She says it's the most human thing anyone at Synergy Peak has ever written, and she's not sure if that's a compliment or an indictment of the company culture. She also wanted me to tell you that the Q4 forecast you prepared, the one with the vibrant green, it was accurate, more accurate than the external consultant's report. Richard was impressed, though he'd never say it directly. Take your time, come back when you're ready, or don't. Either way, we're all still here, accidentally sharing our screens and pretending we know what we're doing. Linda, I read it 3 times, then I opened my email to Alina, nothing. She hadn't replied to my last message, 4 days of silence. I felt a twist in my stomach, not quite disappointment, more like the acknowledgement of a door that might stay closed. I didn't check Slack. I deleted the notification emails without opening them. I wrote a reply to Linda. Linda, thank you for checking in. Tell Richard I'm reflecting deeply. Tell Deborah thank you for the kind words about the forecast and that I hope the green was vibrant enough. I'm not sure when I'll be ready, but I'll let you know. Marcus, I sent it. Then I turned my phone off again, not dead, just off, a small act of control in a life that had felt out of control for too long. On the 7th day I wrote something, not an email, not a report. I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and a notebook, one I'd bought at Harold's bookstore, leather-bound and overpriced and beautiful, and I wrote. I didn't know what I was writing, I just started with the first sentence that came to mind. The cursor blinked 3 times before I clicked it. I wrote about the boardroom, about Deborah's eyebrows, about Richard's headset and Alina's email and the silence that followed. I wrote about the orange juice and the Perseverance poster and the way the deep-sea anglerfish glowed in the dark. I wrote until my hand cramped and the pen ran dry and the sun moved across my kitchen table from east to west. It was terrible. I knew it was terrible even as I wrote it. The sentences were too long, the metaphors were mixed. The pacing was uneven, lurching from humor to despair like a car with a bad transmission. But it was mine. It was the first thing I'd made in years that didn't have a template, a brand guideline, a Deborah-approved color palette. I wrote again on the 8th day, and the 9th. I fell into a rhythm: wake up, make coffee, write until noon, walk to the bookstore, read until evening, come home, write more. I filled half the notebook. I wrote about my father and his recliner. I wrote about my mother's lasagna. I wrote about Harold and his sections organized by vibe. I wrote about Alina, not the Alina of the email, but the Alina I'd known, the Alina who laughed too loud at bad movies and cried at commercials and once spent an entire weekend trying to teach herself pottery, covering our apartment in gray sludge. On the 10th day I got an email from Alina. Marcus, I'm sorry I didn't reply sooner. I needed to think. Your email, it made me cry. Not because it was sad, but because it was the most honest thing you'd ever written to me. In 2 years together, I don't think you ever told me you were sorry. Not because you weren't, but because you never let yourself be vulnerable enough to say it. I want to see you, not to get back together, not yet, just to talk. In person, the way we used to before everything got complicated. There's a coffee shop near the park where we used to walk. Saturday, 2 p.m. If you're not ready, I understand, but I'd like to try. Alina, I read it at 7 a.m., sitting at my kitchen table with my notebook open, pen in hand. The morning light was coming through the window, golden and sharp, cutting across the page. I felt my heart do that complicated rhythm, but this time it wasn't panic, it was something else. Possibility maybe, or fear, or both. I replied immediately before I could second-guess myself. Alina, Saturday, 2 p.m. I'll be there. Marcus, I spent the next 2 days in a state of low-grade terror. I tried to write and couldn't. I walked to the bookstore and couldn't focus on reading. I bought new clothes, not business casual, not sweatpants, but something in between. A sweater that was actually soft, jeans without holes. I got a haircut, the first in 3 months, and the barber, a woman named Tanya with a shaved head and a tattoo of a scissors on her forearm, told me I had good hair, shame to waste it on that corporate cut you had before. On Saturday, I woke up at 5 a.m. I showered, I changed clothes 3 times. I stood in front of my mirror and practiced smiling, then stopped because I looked like a serial killer. I left my apartment at 1 p.m., 2 hours early, and walked to the park. It was a beautiful day, unseasonably warm for late October. The trees were fully turned now, a riot of red and gold against the blue sky. The park was full of people, families with strollers, couples on blankets, a man flying a kite that looked like a dragon. I walked the path that Alina and I had walked 100 times, the one that looped around the pond and under the stone bridge. I arrived at the coffee shop at 1:45. It was the same one we'd always gone to, a narrow place with exposed brick and mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that changed daily. I ordered a black coffee. Alina had always teased me for drinking it black, like a cop in a noir film, and sat at a table near the window where I could see the door. At 2:03, Alina walked in. She looked the same but different. Her hair was shorter, cut in a bob that framed her face. She was wearing a coat I'd never seen, deep green, the color of pine trees. She scanned the room, saw me, and paused, just for a second, a hesitation so small I might have imagined it. Then she walked over. Marcus, she said. Alina. We stood there, awkward, until she laughed, a short, nervous sound, and sat down across from me. I pushed her coffee toward her. I'd ordered it without asking, a cappuccino with cinnamon the way she always drank it. A risky move, maybe too familiar, but she smiled when she saw it. You remembered, she said. I remember a lot of things, I said. I'm just not sure I ever showed you that I did. She wrapped her hands around the cup. Her nails were painted dark blue, almost black. She'd always painted them bold colors, even in winter. I'd found bottles of nail polish in our bathroom drawer once, at least 20 of them, a rainbow of tiny glass containers, and I'd teased her about having enough to open a salon. She'd said, I like having options, Marcus. You should try it sometime. How are you? She asked. Really? I told her. I told her about the leave, the bookstore, the writing. I told her about my father's comment about working too hard, my mother's advice to be messy. I told her about Stevens the butler and his remains of the day. I told her things I hadn't told anyone, things I was only just discovering myself. She listened the way she always had, her head tilted slightly, her eyes focused, as if I were the only person in the room. It was one of the things I'd loved about her, this intensity of attention, and one of the things that had exhausted me, because it made me feel like I needed to be interesting, needed to have something worth saying. I've been thinking, she said when I finished, about what I said about inertia. It was cruel, but it was also wrong. You're not inert, Marcus, you never were. You're just careful, you weigh things, you consider. And in a world that rewards speed and noise, that looks like inertia, but it's not. Richard said the same word, I said. Inert, in his office. It was like hearing it from you all over again. Richard sounds like an asshole, I laughed, surprised. He might be, but he's not wrong. I have been waiting. For what I don't know, for permission, for a sign, for someone to tell me it's okay to want something. Elena stirred her cappuccino, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. What do you want, Marcus, now, in this moment? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and bright. I looked at her, really looked at her, the small scar above her eyebrow from a childhood bike accident, the way her left eye closed slightly more than her right when she smiled, the freckles on her nose that she hated and I loved. I want to keep writing, I said. I want to see what happens if I take it seriously. Not as a hobby, not as something I do when I'm on leave, but as, I don't know, as a practice, as a way of being in the world. That's good, she said. What else? I want to figure out if I can be someone who doesn't need a windowless office to feel safe, someone who makes things happen instead of waiting for them. And, she was looking at me with that intensity, that terrifying, beautiful focus. And I want to see you again, I said. Not because I'm lonely, or because I'm scared of change, or because you represent something comfortable from my past. I want to see you because you're the only person who ever made me feel like the careful part of me was okay. And I think I need to learn to feel that way about myself, but in the meantime I'd like to try if you want to. She was quiet for a long moment. The coffee shop noise surrounded us, the espresso machine hissing, a baby crying, two women laughing at a table nearby. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and steady, no longer the panicked Morse code of the boardroom. I'd like to try, she said finally. But slowly, Marcus. I need to know that you're doing this for you, not for me. That you're changing because you want to, not because you think it's what I want. I am, I said, and I meant it. I'm doing it for me, but I'd like you to be there if you want to be. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, slightly sticky from the cinnamon on her cappuccino. It was the first time we'd touched in 8 months, and it felt like coming home to a house you'd forgotten you missed. Saturday walks, she asked. Like we used to, Saturday walks, I agreed. And maybe Thursday coffee, and Tuesday, I don't know, Tuesday something, I'll figure it out. She laughed, that full, loud laugh that had always made me feel like I'd won something. Tuesday something, I like that, very nonspecific, very un-Marcus. I'm trying to be less Marcus, I said, or maybe more Marcus, I'm not sure which yet. We sat in the coffee shop until the afternoon light turned golden, talking about nothing and everything. Her new job at a nonprofit, my notebook full of terrible writing, the pottery class she'd finally mastered, the book Harold had recommended. When we left, we walked through the park together, not holding hands, not yet, but close enough that our shoulders brushed every few steps. I walked her to her car. She turned to me, her face lit by the setting sun. Marcus, yeah, your 2 weeks are almost up. What are you going to do about Synergy Peak? I thought about it. I thought about Richard's office, the leather and the coffee, the degrees on the wall. I thought about Deborah's mixed metaphors and the Perseverance poster and the smell of protein shakes. I thought about the Q4 forecast, the vibrant green, the softened y-axis. I don't know yet, I said. But whatever I do, I'm not going to be invisible anymore. She smiled, got in her car, and drove away. I stood on the sidewalk and watched her go, the taillights disappearing into the dusk, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, uncertain, fragile, terrifying hope.